Welcome to my kimono upcycling channel. In this video, I'll be showing you how to sew a bookcase and a bookmark. There are plenty of tutorials on how to sew a book cover, but I don't think there are many, if any, on these specific items on YouTube yet, so I'm sharing a step-by-step tutorial with you. I've been using kimono-obi fabric, but any thick material such as denim, oxford, or canvas would work just as well. If you're using a lighter weight fabric, you might want to add some structure by applying feasible interfacing. As we go through the process, I'll show you the exact dimensions of the fabric needed, and I'll also include a summary at the end of the video. In the description, I've added links to the tools I'm using, so feel free to check those out if you're interested. Before we dive into the tutorial, I'll be talking about the background of creating these items, the meaning behind the kimono fabric I'm using today, and how I acquired the fabric. If you'd rather jump straight into the sewing part, feel free to skip ahead. First, let me share how I came up with these ideas. My main job is upcycling vintage Japanese kimonos into reusable items such as glasses cases, clutch bags, corsets, head accessories, bangles, and more. Since starting my business, I've received so many wonderful ideas from people both at market stalls and on social media. One day, a lovely follower messaged me suggesting I make a bookcase. At first, I wasn't quite sure what she meant, so I asked her to send me some reference pictures. She also explained that there are people who like to keep their books clean when carrying them around in bags or when traveling. Since the kimono-obi fabric I generally use is quite sturdy, she thought it would make a more practical and durable option than crochet or other soft materials. The idea really resonated with me, so I decided to give it a try. First, I searched YouTube and the internet for tutorials, but I couldn't find anything similar, so I set out to create my own design. Because obi fabric is intricately woven and often embroidered, I didn't want to add a buttonhole to close the case, as it might damage the fabric's beauty. I also wanted to make the most of the materials and minimize fabric waste. That's how I came up with the idea of using a fabric band made from the same materials to secure the book in place. I also decided to use the backing fabric as a flap, as it's generally lighter than the front panel, making it easier to open and close the case. Similarly, the idea for the magnetic bookmark came from my Instagram followers. Just before Christmas, I asked my followers in Instagram story what kind of kimono upcycled items they'd like to give as a gift. One of the responses was a magnetic bookmark. I'd never thought about making one before, but then another person messaged me with the same request, so I knew I had to give it a try. I researched how other brands make them and what sizes would work best with kimono fabric. I also realized I needed to create small pockets within the fabric to properly secure the magnets. Since it's a gender-neutral item doesn't require a large piece of fabric and is relatively quick to make, it turned out to be a perfect, affordable, and unique gift idea. The fabric I'm using in this project is a stunning kimono-obi fabric featuring peonies, butterflies, and sakura cherry blossom. The meaning of each feature is as follows. Peonies are large, full blooming flowers with elegant petals that captivate those who admire them. Their luxurious appearance has made them a popular kimono motif, symbolizing prosperity and happiness. In the past, it was even said that only those of high status were allowed to wear peony-patterned kimonos. Butterfly. Butterflies soaring high into the sky have long been seen as symbols of longevity, immortality, and success. Sakura cherry blossoms bloom all at once, representing abundance and prosperity. Because they bloom spring, a season of new beginning, they also symbolize fresh starts and new chapters in life. In Japan, this type of obi is often worn during the Seijin Shiki, coming of age ceremony, a significant milestone for young adults aged 18 to 20. The design reflects parents' hopes and aspirations for their child's bright future and limitless possibilities. I thrifted this beautiful piece from an online kimono retailer based in Japan for 70 to 80 pounds. I've also talked about how I source my kimonos in other videos, so if you're interested, feel free to check out my channel. This particular obi belt is called a fukuro-obi, which translates to bag belt. It gets its name because it's made with both a front and back layer of fabric, creating a structure similar to a bag. Fukuro-obi are generally worn for formal occasions, such as weddings, ceremonies, meaning they're often only used a handful of times. Because of this, they're usually in excellent condition, making them ideal for upcycling projects. Now that you know the story behind these creations, shall we get started? The fabric required for this project is 46 cm 18 inches in length and 27 cm 11 inches in width for both the outer and inner layers. I rotate the fabric horizontally and take 27 cm for the width. By the way, I find using a placemat with measurements like this really helpful for getting everything neatly aligned. A rotary cutter is also a great tool. It makes cutting fabric faster, more precise, and much easier, especially for straight lines and multiple layers. There are plenty of different cutting mats and rotary cutters available online, but I strongly recommend investing in good quality ones. I've included links to the products I'm using in the description, so take a look if you don't already have them. Inside an obi, you'll often find an obishin, a lining fabric that gives the obi structure and thickness. We won't be using it for this project, but you can repurpose it, for example, as a clean cloth or even to absorb oil from a frying pan. I unpick one of the seams, measure 15 cm 6 inches and cut out the lengths I need. If you're using obi fabric, this 15 cm section will form the flap of the bookcase. For the inner lining, I take a 27 cm piece from the back panel of the obi. You don't have to use the same fabric, but I like using the back panel as it gives the final piece a more cohesive look while making the most of material. Next, we need to round off the edges of the flap. You can use any round object to make the curve before trimming. You also need a strip of fabric measuring 27 cm 11 inches in length and 7 cm 3 inches in width for the band. Cut this from the back panel as well and trim it neatly. Now that we have all the pieces ready, let's start sewing. First, we need to reinforce the connection between the body and the flaps. Since this section is folded, we'll press it flat with an iron. Throughout this project, we'll be doing a lot of rounding. It might feel like a hassle, but trust me, it makes a huge difference to the final finish, especially when working with thick structured fabric like obi. Once that's done, press the seam allowance open with iron. Now let's make the band. Fold the fabric strap in half and secure it with fabric clips. I've mentioned this in other videos, but if you're buying fabric clips, I highly recommend the ones from the Japanese brand I use. I once tried a cheaper alternative at half the price, but they broke so easily. When working with heavy fabric like obi, you need strong clips, so I think it's worth investing in high quality ones. Once the band is sewn, press the seam open and turn it inside out. I'm not a huge fan of this part, but using a chopstick, it only took me a minute. If you know a faster or easier way, let me know in the comments. After turning it inside out, press it flat again, then position it on the outer fabric, 4 cm 2 inches from the edge. If you're using obi fabric, leave the edge folded and measure from there. If you're using plain fabric, fold and press a 1 cm 0.5 inch hem first, then place the band from the folded edge. Make sure the seam inside of the band is facing down so it won't be visible in the final piece. Now sew it in place with 0.5 cm seam allowance. Next, fold the outer fabric in half and sew the sides, leaving a 1 cm seam allowance. It's important to align the seam where the body and flap connects, as fabric can shift while machine sewing. To avoid misalignment, I recommend starting from this seam rather than the folded edge. To create a gusset, press open the side seam allowances, form a triangle at the bottom corners, and stitch 1.5 cm from the edge using the seam guide on your sewing machine. Repeat this on both sides, then trim the seam allowance. That's the outer body done. Now repeat the same steps to sew the inner lining. Once both layers are complete, place the flaps together with the right sides facing. At this stage, trim the corners to match the rounded shape. When sewing the flaps, it's important to reinforce the start and end points with a double stitch, especially at the connection between the body and flap, as this area experiences a lot of movement when in use. If this seam isn't secure, the stitches may fray over time. Once sewn, trim the corners, iron the seam allowance, and turn the outer body inside out. Then insert the inner lining. Finally, clip the edges together and top stitch 0.2 to 0.5 cm from the edge. You can stitch along the flap for extra durability, but I personally prefer the look without visible seam on the flap. If you choose not to top stitch the flap, make sure to reinforce the side seams with a secure double stitch to prevent fraying. And that's it! Your bookcase is complete. Next, we'll move on to making a magnetic bookmark using the same fabric. Before we start, we need to create a pattern piece from paper. First, mark out a rectangle measuring 7 cm 3 inches in width and 14 cm 5.5 inches in length. Then measure 3 cm 1 inch in from both ends along the width and length. Connect these points as shown in the video. Then cut along the lines to create a shape with trapezium ends and a rectangular middle section. These trapezium sections will be where the magnets are inserted. Now turn the obi fabric to a horizontal position and measure out a 7 cm width. Place the pattern on top and cut accordingly. We'll also need a second piece for the inner layer, using the backing fabric of the same obi. With heavily embroidered obi fabric, you often find a lot of loose threads on the back, which can make it bulky, so we'll trim those at this stage. Next, place the two fabric pieces right side together and sew around the edges with a 0.5 cm seam allowance, leaving a 6 cm 2 inches gap for turning inside out. Once sewn, trim the edges and open seam allowance with iron. Carefully turn the fabric the right way around and insert the magnets into the designated trapezium sections. For this project, I am using magnets that are 20 mm in diameter and 2.5 mm thick. Check the description for links on where to find them. After inserting the magnets, secure them with clips and double check that they are positioned correctly so they attract each other when folded. Clip the opening shot, then sew a rectangular outline around the edges and an additional line through the center to hold the magnets securely in place. Be extra careful when sewing near the magnets, as hitting them with your needle could break both the needle and your machine. I've made two bookmarks using the same obi fabric, but as you can see, each one looks unique depending on which section of the fabric is used. Here's a summary of the fabric dimensions required for both projects. You can also find links to all the tools I used in the description. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more kimono upcycling projects. See you next time. Mata ne!